Hello, one and all, and welcome to another episode of the Omnia Performance Podcast with myself, Jonny, and Simon for part number 2. So at this point, if you haven't listened to part number 1, then you wouldn't watch Return of the King before you've watched The Fellowship, would you? So why not just take a second, rewind, go back to part 1, get the context that you need, because today we're going to explore everything that happened after exiting the Special Forces in the world of Simon Jeffries. And there's a lot to unpack, so stick around, because there's going to be some valuable lessons. Jonny, what are you most excited to talk about today?
I'm excited to talk about the transition from the corporate life that Simon's described in a little bit of detail last time into the who he is now, because I've been through similar transition myself, and it's always exciting to hear how somebody kind of arrived at that moment. But we'll arrive at that in due course, I think. I've jumped.
You know what I'm most excited to hear? You know what I'm most excited to do today? Is see the influx of people that hit follow and or subscribe on whatever platform they're listening on, as it would be rude of you not to at this point. We would massively appreciate it. It helps us get more visibility to the powers that be with the podcast gods, which means better guests, better conversations, more exciting things to come, and we love having you all along for the ride, so please do all of those things. Thank you very much, and check us out on YouTube. Cheers. So, for a bit of context, last episode we ran through Simon's military career, essentially what drew him to the military, which seemed to be a bit of a cosmic draw in many ways. But I'm being purposefully cryptic because you should know all this. And we basically got up to the point in the timeline where the military was coming to an end, and chapter 2 was beginning. So, Simon, why don't you talk us through the day that it was, I am no longer contracted with the MOD. I am no longer in the Special Forces. What now?
Do you know what? I can't even remember what the specific day was, so it shows how significant that was. I think once I'd made the thing with the military is you have to give a year's notice. So unlike a normal job where you give anywhere between a month or a couple of months, it's a year. It's 12 months notice from when you put your chit in to leave and actually leaving. So you have a huge amount of time to sort of prepare yourself for it. So by the time it actually got to the point of leaving, my mind was already in that place. I guess I hadn't already exited. That's the wrong way to phrase it, but I was ready for it. What helped me as well, because I hadn't joined the military until I was a bit older, till I was 24, I had a very good network outside of the military, and again that sort of smoothed the transition. So it didn't feel as big a step as I see with some people who join at 18 and all they know is a military life, and it feels like a massive step into the unknown. So what I didn't know is exactly what I was going to do. I knew it was the right reason to leave, and I knew it was the right reason to leave. Essentially, I ticked all the boxes of everything that I wanted to do, and I wanted more freedom. It does place huge demands on relationships, your time, you're away a lot. And it just got to the point where I wanted more control in my life. So that was my main reason for leaving. I just asked myself, if I leave, am I going to regret any of the things any jobs that I haven't done? And the answer was no. Yes, there were some things that would have been good to do, but they may have come about in 1 year, 5 years, or not at all, because so much of it is luck of the draw, on the rotation you're on, where you're on, what jobs come up, who else is around, all of these factors. And they didn't mean enough to keep me in for an indefined amount of time. And so I just took that decision to leave. So I kind of jumped without the parachute, trusting that I'd figure it out on the way down.
That's a very power regiment thing of you to say. I'm sure that's that's something that a few pints deep would cause some interesting discussions. But it's a big question, isn't it? Leaving the military full stop, leaving the Special Forces. I think all three of us have a mutual connection who was in the SBS for as long as anyone I can really think of that's spoken to us about how difficult it was as a concept to actually know what lay on the other side, because it's such a brotherhood, it's such a always on existence, it's such a high pressure, high demand existence, it's such a virtuous existence in many ways as well, in terms of the pride you'll have in yourself, that letting that go, even though it can be rationalized as the right thing, from an identity point of view, can be a real challenge for people. You sound like you were really quite comfortable with that process in the 12 months that you had. But how did that compare to friends, brothers, comrades, whatever you want to call them, that have been in similar situations? Because I'm sure everybody processes it very different.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this answer. One is remembering that it just becomes a job. So from the outside, when you're not in anything, you will see almost like the sheen or the virtual side, like you said, whether that's elite sport or whatever it is, and you only see the 5% generally, which is the exciting things. Once you're in it, it's a job, and there's still loads of bullshit, loads of boredom, and once you've been in a while and the newness of it wears off and you're kind of into the grind. I know loads of blokes that would leave, but tied into mortgages and all the rest of it. Because one of the things that does happen is when you put your chit in for that year, you lose your special forces pay. So because it's termed as retention pay as opposed to spec pay, so that's a massive hit for a lot of guys for a year to lose that cash. So I think it's remembering that it does just become a job, and once you've ticked some of the big boxes, then there's also good reasons to leave. The one thing that everyone misses, and that I miss, and that you can't replicate outside, is that brotherhood feeling, or that the sense of comradeship, however you want to phrase it, just being around your mates every day. That's what you miss, and that's what's really hard. I think looking back, that you kind of look back to, and that you remember the most. So there's that side of it. The other side on the identity piece, I think I probably did underestimate, because I had a good social group outside and the rest of it. For the year or two when I was first outside, I think I probably underestimated how much that identity piece did impact me. And it's only in retrospect, when I think back, actually how much it probably was under the surface, sort of raising its head. The the general manifestation of it for me was that FOMO. It's You're doing a new job outside of the military, and it's, oh, what are the lads doing? I wonder what they're doing. I wonder if there's exciting stuff happening. However, you do quickly realise when you speak to people, it's the same old stuff. It's the same jobs. It's the same drips. It's the same complaints. It doesn't really change. And so you do realise that actually you're not. You made a decision to leave for good reasons, and you can't have both sides of it. You can't have the good stuff and the stuff that you didn't want to do, which is why you left, i.e., being away. Um, so it was definitely the right decision. Yes, there are parts that I miss. I think everyone does handle it differently. I think I was lucky, mainly because I did have such a strong network outside and hadn't joined until I was 24. I think that, and I did overall did 8 years, so I hadn't done the 20-year span. So obviously that lessens the impact. If you join at 18 and do 25 years, your identity is going to be so entwined with that. It's going to be much harder to break.
There's an element of being institutionalized as well within these kind of uh, roles. If you've been, like you say, 25 years or so in a military service, then your whole life is based around that, and everything that you understand is going to be based around that. But with only 8 years, I say only 8 years. That's an extraordinary stretch of time when you look at it. But with 8 years under your belt, do you feel like you had been less institutionalized in that sense? Then you had less, because I know that people can come out and feel like tangibly, maybe not instantly understand, but some of the general structure, some of the application of that structure, and some of that responding to command, etc., not then being in their lives is kind of odd. It's like overall, you've got to take responsibility for absolutely everything, and now you're on your own to do it. And whereas beforehand there was a kind of a structure and a hierarchy of command, etc., that you would have moved around, etc.
Yeah, I think it's the structure is the key word that you hit upon there. You have very structured days, jobs, etc., tasks, and that does make life easier in that sense. But also, military life is easy. I don't care what anyone says. It's the easiest job. Okay, it's the easiest job in the world outside of if you have something traumatic happen. That's a different story. So let's set aside the traumatic instances. Outside of that, easiest job on the planet. If it aligns with you, like if you hate doing what the military does, you're obviously going to hate it. But if it taps in, as we talked about last one, your identity, you basically hang around with your mates. You get loads of freedom. You get more holidays than a teacher does. You don't have to worry about dental stuff, medical stuff. Like you could eat all your meals on camp. Everything's taken care for you. And
Yeah.
so in that sense, it's a very, very easy life. You go in and hang around with your mates and do a job that you signed up to do. Obviously, people have different experiences within that, and it's a kind of a broad generalization. But if you compare it to normal life or life outside of it, you have so much more that you have to think about and take care of. So all of those things that were taken care of for you in the military are gone, and so is that structure. And so that does have a big impact on people as well.
It's just a huge amount to take on, isn't it? I mean, it's at a point in your life where you're kind of past learning things as well. I mean, university is a great example of, you got to do your own washing, you got to do your own cleaning, you got to look after all your food, you've got to determine whether a meal deal is actually a good use of money or whether buying that pasta and that rice pudding and sticking it all together is going to be the more budget-friendly way of doing things. But you don't expect to do that at 32, 33 in any other profession, because you've had things provided to you for such a long period of time that just that learning curve, especially coming from such a... I don't want to use this word, but it's the one that's coming to my head. Macho environment, such an egoed up, masculine, dominant, self-driven environment. To become a student again in the real world must be a real challenge, not just practically speaking, but from a personal point of view. Because I still find there's some things that I would assume I'm more competent at than I would be when I go back to picking up a cricket bat and trying to hit some cricket balls. I'm like, I'm significantly shitter than I used to be at this. And that's obvious. I haven't hit a cricket ball in like 8 years. But there's still a part of me that's like, I thought you were better than that, Fergus. You carry yourself higher. And I can imagine all of these things at once, exiting the military, cooking, cleaning, responsibility, income, all these things at once can be really overwhelming.
Yeah, what I will say, that may apply to maybe younger guys who join the young and come out, maybe aren't relationships generally, especially our world. It's not the fact, they've all got families and stuff. It's not like they're coming out and learning how to, shop and do all those things. But it's just, you're right in the sense that it's a layer of factors that are added on top. I think the bigger piece that you talk about there with skill learning is understanding what you want to do on the outside. What's the job that you're going to do? How are you going to fulfill the purpose that you've just left? You've had a single one for such a long time and had an identity around that. How are you going to replace that? That's the hard point. And I see it, people from the military, blue light services as well, people who leave police, fire, ambulance, anyone who's been in quite a niche slash extreme, extreme or bubble type of environment, finding what you're going to do outside of that is the hardest thing. And I found that the hardest thing. And I think it's the hardest thing for most people. And even for people outside of the military, I work with a lot of people in a range of different jobs and roles, and trying to tap into that purpose, passion piece, what drives you, is a big question for a lot of people. And there's people who go through their whole life searching for that and don't necessarily find it.
What did that look like for you on the other side? Because you had a year to prep, and you're clearly a very pragmatic bloke. So I think we could all safely assume you had a plan. But I know there's been a lot of evolution to that plan in the past couple of years. So why don't you talk us through what you thought your next chapter would look like, and then actually what happened next?
No plan survives first contact. So basically, I didn't really know. I knew it was the right time to leave. I didn't have an exact plan. So I actually tied it in with my girlfriend at the time. Jo got a job in London. And so I figured, why not? Why not go to London and give a job a go there? So I was looking at different consultancies, the classic sort of city type jobs. Went to a careers fair, had a chat with a company, got on with them well. They said come down and meet the boss. Came and had a chat with the boss. And it was a consultancy for project management in the construction industry, which I had no clue about, but I liked the company. Seemed like a good environment. I was like, why not? Let's just give it a go and see what happens. And it turns out that was a 100% not for me. Um, I so I my poor ex girlfriend Jo. I think she was we'd been together while I was at the end of my military career, loads of time apart, and she was looking forward to this. We're going to move to London and have this stability. And I distinctly remember it was probably the end of week two, maybe, doing the job, and I came back home. I was like, this is shit. I'm not doing this. No way am I doing this the rest of my life. And I was like, oh, I'm going to figure, maybe I can go away again, all this stuff. I actually remember her bursting into tears, 'cause I think that bubble of this normal life just got popped. But from from that from that point, um, what I did, and this was really before I started to study mindset in a more formal way, is I realized I needed to figure that out, and that wasn't just going to happen on its own. And this is what I see with so many people. They know they want to do something else, but they don't treat it in the same way if they wanted to, change the physical body. They don't apply the same practical application or consistency to it. And I love the quote, "You don't stumble upon significance," and it's so true. You're not going to. You're very lucky if you stumble upon it. I was lucky when I was younger and I stumbled upon that significance with the military and had that very clear path. Now, in my, what was I was like early 30s, I was suddenly at the point that, lots of people have after school. They're like, what the fuck do I do? What do I do now? Elsie, the dog's going mad. So what I did was just I got a notepad, blank notepad, and I carried it with me everywhere. And I would ask myself every single day, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? And I percolate that question over and over and over again. And I try to divorce the logical constraints we often put on ourselves. So if an idea came up, I wouldn't dismiss it straight away, no matter how outrageous it was. I'd just put it down, because there's so many different ways to achieve a similar to get to a similar point, even if it's not that exact one that perhaps is a bit too out there. And I just kept asking myself and percolating and ruminating these ideas. And that led to a single epiphany moment that was as strong as when I knew the path was to joining the military. And I was sat on a bus and I was reading Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week. So I was trying to read lots of books around just lots of different things, whether it's business, lifestyle, self-development. And I was reading his book, sat on the bus going into work, and I can't remember what he was exactly talking about, but I knew in that moment that it was business. It was business in some form or another, and more specifically online business, because it tapped into my values of freedom and I guess being in charge of my life, being able to generate my own income. So rather than a job where you have like a set salary, online business, you basically can write your own checks when you get to that point. There's no end. There's really no cap on it, depending on how successful you are. And it also gives you that geographical freedom. And I was like, that is it. I had no idea what that business would be or how it would look like, but I knew absolutely that that was the path. And that was a really freeing moment, because it meant that all the stress and discontent I was having with that London life and that job almost lifted. And I carried on doing that job because it paid my bills. But from that moment on, my purpose became, right, I'm going to figure out what this business is. And so it completely reframed everything. And it's the power of the mind, your internal perspective. So nothing externally changed. I was still in London, still doing the same job, but because internally I suddenly had a different way of looking at it, which was basically, okay, this is just providing me some stability while I figure out this other thing, and then I'll be able to leave. It made all the difference to my experience at that time.
Made that corporate experience somewhat bearable as well, because you could see a timeline on it. Presumably, you found your way through that. Um, Going back to Fergus asking me at the beginning what I was looking forward to hear, it's a brilliant story to hear you tell, because corporately I went through similar nightmares. I had hated the life I was in, and didn't really know what to do about it. But funny you say that, because it's exactly the same thing. I found myself walking around in my garden here with a notepad and a pen, and I wrote down questions similar to yours. What are you good at? What brings you joy? If you only had, sometimes I've asked people, Fergus and I have had this conversation. If you only had 6 months to live, and but all the resources and all the opportunity available to you, what would you do? And then, underline that with, well, why isn't everything pointing at that right now anyway, sort of thing. And had all these kind of moments. And brilliant to hear you say, because it's just funny to me that I also had an epiphany on a bus. So there you go. So buses are clearly vital in that story. But it pays to ask the questions, doesn't it? And I think taking the time to ask yourself those questions and frame them the way you have sounds like it was the perfect conduit to a kind of a mental freedom to then kind of choose how you wanted to move forward in that business life.
I think what you said about you say it's something about buses. It's essentially the creativity process. So the easiest example, which everyone will resonate with, you try and remember someone's name and you can't remember it. It's on the tip of your tongue, but it's not there. And then 3 days later in the shower or somewhere quiet, it'll come to you. And the reason that happens is you've asked your subconscious, oh, what's this person's name? And your brain has been ruminating that. And then when you've got some peace, it will throw out the answer. So this is why that works. You need, and so this is the whole finding your significance piece, or really anything you want to figure out. Whatever you're inputting into your brain is going to percolate. So if you're watching shit all the time, whether that's social media or think about the news, all these other meaningless things essentially, then that's what your brain's going to be ruminating. Like if you want to solve a problem, figure something out, whether that's in your life or in work or something, you need to dig into it. You need to ask yourself that question and you're basically telling your brain and your subconscious, this is important to me, I want to figure it out. And then you need to give step 2 is giving yourself space. So whether that's time out walking with no input, sat on the bus, whatever it is, giving yourself time to process these things, you will get to the answer. You just need to ask the right questions, and you need to allow yourself the space to come up with the answer.
We very often talk about that exact process within the context of LISS, don't we, Jonny? And how actually LISS training from a form of aerobic capacity building, phenomenal. But second to that, within the way that we frame our methodology within the context of a week, for most people working a conventional working pattern, it gives them the start of their weekend to reflect on the week that's just gone, and the time, generally speaking, outdoors, generally speaking, alone, generally speaking, with a specific brief that isn't actually demanding too much of them physiologically, which frees them up psychologically to be able to actually think. Because we all know when you're moving at an easy pace, you can kind of focus and engage. When you're at threshold, you're just thinking, oh, fuck this, fuck this, fuck this, fuck this. And you can't think about anything else. And I think that's actually why so many people will say, I hate running. Because they're so used to that sensation of, oh, fuck this, rather than the freedom that it can give you to actually calibrate and reflect and allow creative processes to unfold. Because I've said on hundreds of podcasts, loads of videos, that the best ideas that come to me are the ones that happen on my long, steady state movements on a Saturday, whether it's on the bike, in the water, on my feet, whatever it is. I come in and normally first thing I do is scribble on my phone in the sort of massive, messy clusterfuck of notes that I have of just post-run thoughts. And often I can then directly translate some of them into a to-do list or start to map something out. And from a business perspective, from a personal perspective, from a podcast perspective, there's always things that are actionable. And that's the creative process, allowing me to sort of make sense of the chaos of the week that's gone by creating the space. And I know recovery processes post-events, or when life just gets in the way and I need to push my list to the evening or the following day or something like that, as soon as that space is no longer protected, I personally feel a lot worse the following week because I haven't given myself that anchor point to reflect on the week that's just gone, allow the creativity to flow and sort of not repeat the sort of short-term mistakes of the past in that sense, because it's just so freeing for me. And that is essentially exactly what you've both described. But rather than being on your feet, it's being on a bus.
And I'm guessing, to come back to your process and where it took you from there, Simon, that you've then, even in that moment that you've described, the bus or that sort of meditative state, wherever it might have been, Fergus is describing it as walking at the bus for me as well, but it can come at any moment where you're creating your own peace, can't it? Presumably, in amongst that, you've then, the structure of how you wanted to work, the online world, that freedom that would give you, has lent itself then to building what it is that you want to build into that, and who you are and what you deliver now must have come from that kind of moment and that understanding. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like that process in itself informed a certain amount of what you wanted to bring to others.
Yes, so once I'd made that decision, I teamed up with John, who I run the Natural Edge with. We'd served together in the military, and he was in the process of leaving. Basically, rang him and said, "You're going to hate having a job. Let's start a business." And then so we set ourselves on that path. And the only two sort of rules we gave ourselves were it has to be geographically free and it has to be scalable, i.e., not time for money. Though that's what we wanted to create. Cue a whirlwind of brainstorming every idea under the sun, reading all the books on business and entrepreneurship, and hearing about all these mistakes that people make and deciding that we're never going to make those. Like we've read the books, that's it. They're gonna make 1 million in 2 years. And we tried all sort. I imported stuff from China to sell on Amazon. What else did we do? I think we were looking at like some ebook at some point. And then the sort of main first business that we had a go at, John can write code, and we've been dabbling in, got into the old Forex stuff. Obviously, watched too many YouTube adverts, and we were like, oh, we'll develop a piece of tracking software for people doing Forex trading and help them improve their trading. Put a year into it, made all the mistakes we said we never would, spent all of our cash, poured like every hour of the day, up at 5 o'clock, go into the office, do 3 hours before started, work at lunch, get back home, work another 3 hours into the evening. And it got to the point where we just realized that it was not going to go anywhere. Perhaps if you had a team of software developers, you could maybe make something out of it, but it it was the fact it would have taken a huge amount more work. And secondly, we realized that we were just chasing money. We weren't really chasing something we cared about. We just started a business for the sake of starting a business to make cash. And the result of that was we were broke in the sense that we had no savings. My relationship came to an end, probably as partly because of so much time I've been spending on it. John's came to an end as well. And so we ended up both moving back into my parents' house, which is the farm back in Worcester. So mid 30s, we moved back into my parents. We bought a 350 quid Ford Focus, which we shared. So if we wanted to go on dates, we'd organise them at the same time and place, so we could share the car to get there. Um, and we were working from our mum's dining room table, and that is when we just said we've got nothing to lose. Let's just do something we care about. And for us, as I talked about in the previous podcast, it was really that health and performance piece. When I was down there at Poole, it was before everyone was applying the more scientific principles to training. And so we took that passion, which we both had, and decided to let's just help other people. And that's when we started the Natural Edge. And we got a couple of clients, and we were earning 400 quid a month. So we were paying ourselves 400 quid a month. We were working from the dining room table and sharing a car that cost 350 quid. And so from the outside, that looks pretty bad. You know, all of your friends at that age are, get stable in careers, getting big promotions, getting married, all the rest of it, buying houses. But actually, it felt great because we were suddenly on a path that felt right. We were like the Natural Edge, and what we were going to do. We're like, this is it. This is going to be what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. Again, we didn't know exactly how it was going to look, but you just get that feeling. You're like, this is it. This feels right in the same way that the military felt right, and that starting a business felt right. This was almost the next evolution. So that's like, yes, this is the path. And then it's been a ridiculous journey of ups and downs to where we are now 5 years later. So we can dig into any of that you like.
It does sound like that. I mean, we've had this with a good few guests, and I know that Fergus has touched on this a lot on the Modern Mind as well. And certainly my experience, again, echoes yours almost exactly, is that finding that kind of alignment with authenticity, with that opportunity to actually, oh, this is actually what I feel good doing, as opposed to what you described before, which was kind of chasing the end result and kind of running into yourself quite a lot doing so. As you say, a shared car in the dining room, it doesn't matter because at least you're kind of happy doing what you're doing. And from that, you then have the space, you then have the mental space and the opportunity to say, well, we can grow this because there's kind of love in it and there's something of us in it, as opposed to that kind of relentless kind of financial chase. And as you say, there will be ups and downs, but the trajectory, a bird's eye view for you is up. I mean, and still, from what we can see from the outside looking in, and knowing as we're getting to now, it's still driven. At the forefront of it is that authenticity and that opportunity to teach others to find their confidence in their own kind of truth and things, which is it's a beautiful thing to witness, and it's certainly a beautiful thing that we've discovered a few times over. Sam the other week on the podcast, having found his art in just being authentic to himself again, it's a story that returns to us, and it's one I love every time, mate. It's good to hear.
Yeah, it's James actually who does all of our filming. It's kind of a similar story. So John knew him from the Royal Marines, left, and had a big period where kind of drifting, didn't really know what exactly it was doing rope access. At one point, grafting in Port Talbot Steelworks. It was like a 2-hour commute either way, grafting all day. Like everyone's seen Port Talbot. It's not a place that you want to work. Um, but he had a real passion from when he was younger around creativity, and he just started. So he bought his first camera. So he used his kind of wages, which are limited. It was massive money doing the work that he was doing. Bought his first camera, started experimenting, started learning, just teaching himself. And after a couple of years, I can't remember how many years it was, 2, 3 years of doing that, built it up, did more and more, until he got to the point where he was able to go full time with it. And now we employ him for like 80% of his time. But he's the way that he describes it, he says that day when he went full time doing something that he really cared about, he said it's like better than winning the lottery. He said winning the lottery would not feel as good as having worked and broke free to do something that he really cares about and is passionate about.
I don't think when the going gets tough, when the tax man comes knocking, when the website goes down, when a contract copyright lawyer comes knocking on your door because it turns out that some subsidiary in Nigeria of the Coca-Cola Corporation have used the same phrasing as you have in a social media post, it's very difficult to care if you don't have the sort of emotional equity in a business as well. I can't see I'm financially driven, but I can't see any world where I would be financially driven purely for the sake of finances. So the sort of equity at the back end is only valuable if the equity along the way, in terms of the sort of investment for me as an individual, is really bought in from an authentic point of view. And I think the trap you fell into with the entrepreneurialism for the sake of entrepreneurialism is a headspace a lot of people find themselves in these days, because they're just desperate to get away from what they want. I want to start a business. I want to own a business. Great. What is it? I don't know yet. Okay. Well, you want to be an entrepreneur. Fantastic. But it should be flipped on its head. This is the business that I want to create. And in doing so, I will become an entrepreneur. Not I want to be an entrepreneur. Let's figure out what the business is that I want to create. And it just creates a much healthier relationship with the stress as well, because we've condensed the journey a little bit, Simon. But essentially, your role profession now with the natural edge is helping people refine their mindset and get the best out of themselves on a day-to-day basis through the neuroscience and mindset studies that you've engaged in over the past couple of years, alongside your experience in the military. Is that a fair summary? Top line?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. With that in mind, I think it's really relevant to the discussion we've just had, because people are at a loss as to who they should be, what they should be doing on a day-to-day basis. These are life questions, aren't they? And you are in the trenches with people asking these questions and supporting them along the way. So I think for the sake of those listening, given that you've worked with such a wide variety of people in the modern world, what are the biggest challenges that you see in driven people that you're sort of working to overcome on a day-to-day basis?
Good question. I will answer. I'll just touch on one point that you said, because I think it's an important one in terms of, and it is a lesson, is a mindset lesson in itself. What you said about there's a lot of people that want to be a business owner or be an entrepreneur, but they don't really have enough intrinsic buy-in. Running a business or starting a business has been the hardest thing that I've done. And there is no way that I would have stuck to it and carried on if I didn't have that very deep intrinsic desire. In exactly the same way that I would not have got through those hard selection courses in the military without a deep internal desire, regardless of the external rewards, to get through it. And so you can think of this on a sliding scale. The harder the thing that you want to do in life, the more bought in you have to be. Now, for everyone, that's different. Not everyone clearly does not need to be elite athletes or in special forces or start their own business. But the more elite that you want to do, so I don't know the right wording to explain this, but the harder you want to do something, as you get lower down the percentages of people that achieve these crazy things, the more bought in you have to be, the more it has to be as an obsession, the more that you have to have a deep, deep, intrinsic desire to do that thing. And if you don't have it, you will not stick to it. And that's all I've got to say about that. That was just another side point. So I'll come back to your question on what I see people struggling with. So the classic person that we help is somebody that is successful. They've achieved success in life. And the best way to describe it is they have all of the pieces of the puzzle to be happy, but there are something or a few things that are holding them back from fully realizing and almost enjoying that success and feeling that happiness. So they've got the job, the house, the family, whatever it is. Things that we see come up a lot are cycles of perfectionism and procrastination, stress, not being able to switch off. So not being able to switch off and be present with their family, worrying about things, which kind of ties into that stress too much, especially things out of their control. And then there's an element of imposter syndrome. So, plenty of people that are CEOs that run successful businesses, and yet there's still that element of self-doubt on whether they're worthy of being there, that they're going to get found out at some point. And there was one more I was going to mention, but those are the classic ones that I see all of the time. And from the outside, you wouldn't expect it. It's people that look like they're nailing life. And what we see all the time when people come in, especially when we do our group calls, is how good it is for those people to see that it's not just like, oh, it's not just me. I thought there was something wrong with me, and it's not. In fact, when I meet people and people ask what I do, and I give a quick summary like I have to you there around the classic things that I see and people I help, a lot of the time the response I get is, "Hell, that's me. You're talking about me there." And so I think it's far more common than people realize, but nobody talks about it because we're all putting our best face forward on social media and all the rest of it. But it's very, very common.
It sounds like it's not just common, but usual, isn't it? It's par for the course, really. Is somebody in that position is then going to suffer from the pressures of that and all the things you've just described. But as you say, reaching out and finding somebody to actually talk to about it, and then discovering that they can normalize it through that process is most likely a particularly freeing process in of itself, I would expect. And just that normality, or that experience of normality, as you've just said, oh well, it's not just me, can be hugely rewarding in of itself, can't it? I think we probably all three of us have been through that at some point, and it's I know from experience that when you look around and say, God, I thought I was the only one, and it turns out that everybody in the room's got their hand up for this, you think, bloody hell, it reduces the blood pressure immediately, doesn't it?
Yeah, massively. And I think Fergus, on that point that you were just saying, Jonny, about us all being there, were you about to ask if I ever experienced those things?
Specifically because to frame it through my own lens, I sometimes look back on the person I was last year when I was training for the double brutal and the way that I structured my life and the outputs that I had on a week-to-week basis. And I can't compute how I managed it. I don't see myself as that person currently, even though my outputs are the same. They're just reallocated somewhat. And I struggle to actually perceive myself as that past version of myself, and almost feel like not like I'm letting myself down in any way, because as I've said, I'm aware that I've just reallocated the priorities somewhat in the short term, but I just can't compute. I almost feel like the credibility that I've earned with that has gone somewhat dormant. And given you had such an extensive 8 years in the SF, and you're now in the position that you are, do you ever find yourself sort of questioning whether you still have the expertise, everything's still fresh, and that you're the right person to be giving this advice, and actually you're the right person to be helping these people? Because it's experience is a funny one, because it's front of mind only temporarily, and then life gets in the way, isn't it? But it's all still there. So it's a case of maybe there's some advice you can give me on how I can better sort of look at the ebbs and flows of my year, and the times that the foot's to the floor and the times that the foot's a little bit off. But I wouldn't call it imposter syndrome at my end. It's more kind of yeah. I'm not even sure how to describe it. But it's
Fergus, if I may, we're going to psychoanalyze Fergus here. You ready, Simon? Let's go. With you, it tends to be when you're not pointed directly at something, and those things that you've just described, you suffer from a little bit of a kind of a personal identity loss. It's like you struggle to say, well, this is Fergus, because it's not slammed down in these kind of very detailed ways. And the double brutal was a good example, because you put so much into it, and almost unraveled during that, and we did a little bit of catching on that, didn't we? But then now, because things are on quite an even keel and you're not kind of pushing mad hard into something, then you're questioning whether or not you are the Fergus that you had become in that time. And I think that's an identity kind of thing. And I have some answers for you, but I think Simon's probably much more qualified to do it. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's belief versus truth. You've got a belief that isn't the truth. You're interpreting that through a lens of your belief system, which is your identity. That's not the reality. That's not the real world truth. So it sounds like you're doing, you do something like the double brutal. You get to that end point and probably embrace that success for maybe a short period of time, and then as time passes, you feel like somehow that doesn't count anymore because it was a year ago. Oh, that doesn't count. So am I still going to be relevant to people coming to me for advice? Which is that's a belief. That's not the truth. Like before I met you, before we did our first podcast, I obviously went and looked at your stuff and saw the stuff that you'd done 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and it's all incredibly impressive. And at no point, and nor do any of the viewers, look at your stuff and go, oh, I did a double brute a year ago, but it's probably gone soft now. Probably not going to listen to it. Do you know what I mean?
What did he do last month?
Yeah, it's bonkers, isn't
it's
it?
funny because it's not an external thing. It's kind of an intrinsic. It manifests as confusion sometimes. It's kind of a, how did I make that work? But I know I've got it in me. But it's kind of when I'm out of that, when I'm not in it, it's difficult to have faith that I can turn it back on, which even though I have all of the empirical proof to know that it's sitting there. So I think because this podcast is not about me and we've done this to death with the double brutal at this point, how do you reflect on your career within that context and your belief versus truth demands and challenges over the years?
Yeah, what I'd say with that, the important question for you, and this applies to anyone struggling with anything, is for you, you've identified that there's a belief there, is to find out why, is to dig into why do you project that? What is it about you see about yourself and how you interpret those things that have happened that cause those thoughts and emotions? And this is the same for anyone. So for all of us, the way that we interpret the world basically is in line with our own value systems and how we see ourselves. And a lot of those are really helpful. So the ability for you to do the double brutal will be driven by some of your internal narratives, monologues, your identity, and that's really helpful. However, some of that is spilling over without you catching it and is turning into what we call bound nature. It's becoming a negative. And so it's understanding why that's happening, what's causing it, because once you have that information, you can change it. You can essentially catch yourself in the moment, and this is something I do, and literally ask myself, what's the belief here and what's the truth? Why am I thinking that? Why am I getting frustrated? So I don't look back, because, and maybe it's a part of doing this work, but I have that part of my life which I loved and was proud of, but I don't question, I had a good career, and so I don't question. I think in terms of what I'm teaching now, I draw on that experience, but actually I'm learning every day. All the stuff, it's really the last 5 years of, like you said, reading about psychology, neuroscience, and all the rest of it, and working, because I'm working with people on a daily basis. That does keep you sharp, because it's like when you're in the military, you're constantly doing skills and drills. So it's the equivalent of now. So I think but if I wasn't doing that, yeah, then I probably would. When you haven't done something for a while, you're like, oh, can I, which is natural, because we all get skill fade. And so you need to pick that back up. I think kind of a wider point on what you're asking, which kind of ties in, and that is the point of being human. None of us are going to get to the place where we're perfect. We're not going to become some robot where we never procrastinate or never, we're free of imposter syndrome or never doubt ourselves. Of course, it's always going to show up. But what we're trying to do is get to the point where we spend 85% of our time in what we call free nature. So bound nature is basically any negative thought, behavior, emotion that holds us back. And free nature is the opposite. So when we feel good, we do believe in ourselves, we're confident, we're taking the action that move us towards the best version of ourselves. And so it is that whole 80-20. If you can spend 85% of your life in that state, then life's great. And so you're just trying to shift the balance, but it's remembering I still have bad days, I still have bad weeks, but also through this work, you're better able to sit with that. So even when you're not feeling good, when things aren't going well or you're doubting yourself, you can recognize that that's happening and you can sit with it and move yourself out of that state far quicker. So even when you're in those sort of more bound natures, you can deal with it. You can sit with those feelings and not let them completely derail you. And again, that's a really, really important skill or valuable skill to learn.
100%. And everybody listening to this is driven and committed to something, whether that's a 100-mile race, whether it's special forces selection, whether it's getting jacked and being able to run a bit quicker. Everybody that listens and is within our ecosystem has some sort of forward motion, some sort of forward focus. And I know that you often talk about the moving average being more important than the end goal as a concept that's really important to you and everybody that you work with. So I think it's worth touching upon that. But as a sort of final point that people can take away, I know you can't generalize because every individual is different, but for driven, ambitious individuals, what are the recommendations that you often see yield the most results when it comes to refining your mindset, equipping your toolbox with what is required to live a happy, fulfilled, and forward-moving life?
I would say it's a very high level, because at the time we've got a dual approach of one, split it between internal and external. So external, if you are always connected, if the first thing you do when you wake up is bury your head in your phone all the way to the end of the day, if you're not giving yourself any time and space, if you're not doing any kind of physical activity, movement, you're not hydrating, like all the basics, not getting good sleep, basically the basics that make us feel good as a human, you're going to feel shit, and it's going to be very hard to have the mental clarity to do the internal work. So the first one is just look at how your daily habits, basically almost list out your daily habits, how you run your day, and look at them and say, are these going to make a person feel good or not? And then start to make small changes. Just pick one and change it, and then the next one and change it. And then the internal piece is the one that most people don't do. Most people are always focused on looking at the external ones. On the internal, essentially, you need to start having honest conversations with yourself. You need to embrace that discomfort of asking yourself hard questions and giving yourself the answers, almost just what we were talking about there with that belief versus truth. The more that you can do that, the easier life will become. You basically need to really understand yourself, and you need to ask yourself why you think and act in the ways that you do. So remove it from external things and come back to you. Why do you, no matter what happens, why do you react in that way? Why do you respond that way? Why do you think about it this way? Why do you do this or that, or whatever it is? And really start to dig into that, because the more you can uncover it, then you can start to change it.
Fantastic. And to summarize from a conversation we've had in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but everything you've just said with the aim of focusing on the moving average day to day rather than the end goal and the sort of always out of reach North Star that we always pedestalize in the future somewhere. There'll always be more money, there'll always be a faster car, there'll always be a bigger house. And if you're focusing on that and not the journey along the way and the moving average and the progress of the day to day, then you'll lose sight of why you're doing everything in the first place. Is that a fair summary of the narrative you normally use?
Yeah, that's a fair summary. It's essentially progress over perfection. You don't need perfection. Everyone has ups and downs. You don't need perfection to make progress. And that growth mindset, we can always improve. And all of your happiness, satisfaction, and development lies in the process, not the result. So that's where you need to have most of your focus. Set the goals, give you a direction, and then come back to the process, your systems and habits, and what you're doing along the way.
And as you said, no plan survives first contact, so don't be afraid to adapt along the way. Simon, thank you very much. 2 fantastic podcasts there. Really enjoyed running through things in more detail. At The Natural Edge, for social media and the website as well.
Yes.
And please do reach out to Simon with any questions you've got on there about what he's doing, how you can get more involved, or anything that has been said today. Please feel free to reach out to Jonny and or I, as we would love to discuss things further. This is a topic that we are very, very intent on focusing on, and I think really does well to calibrate the relationship between forward motion from an athletic point of view and how that carries us forward from a person in an individual point of view. The two are not separate, the two never will be separate, and that's an important part of our value system and the methodology at Omnia. So thank you everyone for listening. Do all of the podcasty things, engage with all of the stuff in the show notes down below, check out The Natural Edge and everything that comes with it, and we will speak to you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.